More interrupted conversation, but I want to get started here today. We have a lot to do.
Pointed. Yeah.
And very, very interesting ritually conversation.
That rush.
Okay. Okay, so welcome all of you. I'm glad you were able to stay. I also want to thank those that are listening online as well, since we are streaming this morning. I do want to first give thanks to the White Faith Leaders Against Racism group. Inka, Adam, Bill, Andrea will be here shortly, who have been a big support and help in trying to put this together. So thank you for that, and certainly, Bill, for your message this morning, which is a good foundation for what it is we're going to talk about today. We have some. This will be a very thought-provoking kind of a presentation and discussion. We're not here to give you all the answers, but to stimulate your thinking and hopefully have some discussion in following up on what Rev Heller shared this morning, and also Rev Mitchell several weeks ago, who talked about what is our individual responsibility and what is our corporate, meaning church's responsibility in dealing with the issues of hate, divisiveness, and racism. So that's what we're here about today. We have some speakers who've been willing to come and share some things with us. We will start off first with a couple of folks. Actually, Andrea's not here yet. She's coming from All Saints Episcopal and will come as soon as her service is over. So I will watch for her and include her when she comes. I do want to throw a few things out to you though first, to sort of get maybe hopefully a little thought-provoking and stimulation and so forth. We want to plant some seeds today, if you will, and provoke ideas and thoughts about what is our individual and what is our church's responsibility in dealing with the issues of racism and the divisions that we see in our community. That's what the service was about this morning. That's certainly what Rev Mitchell talked about several weeks ago, and the whole issue of how do we demonstrate our love and our acceptance of others in the community and certainly in our own church. So again, trying to kind of throw out some things, make you kind of start thinking about some of these issues. I want to set the tone here a little bit. But first, sort of a disclaimer, obviously in this short period of time, we're not going to be able to talk about all groups, all races, all issues, and so on. But this is really to throw out some things to start to think about. And then we will have some conversation towards the end as a church about where do we want to go from here and what do we want to do. I do want to acknowledge also Earl Bogan is here from the Interfaith Council. We do appreciate him being here. So thank you all for coming. I'll introduce the speakers as we go along here. So in terms of things start thinking about, this is what we call Did You Know? And we have, I will say, please pick up a brochure from Anti-Racist Riverside, which is on the table there. It has a website that has a lot of resources and information in it, and a whole section in a whole area on the issue of did you know, some of the facts that come out of many of the readings that we do. And it's a summary, and it's pretty enlightening, I think, when you look at it and think about what it is that we need to be concerned about. And certainly you can then go to the books and read more about it as well. So trying to keeping this, looking at this somewhat locally, I would say, did you know that much of what we learned in school is either inaccurate or is misleading? there's much more to the issues than what's being taught. And as you know, the school districts these days are really looking at the issues. So what are we going to teach our children about the history of slavery, racism, and all of that? And that's a big controversy these days. And it's important to follow that, certainly if you do. I enjoy it. Fun up here is fine. Did you know that the city is finishing its 10-year housing plan? And did you know, and Janet, I'm sure will talk more about this. Did you know that the issue of housing, where is this housing going to be placed? Why is it in some areas and not in some others? There are a variety of issues that have surfaced through this process of planning its 10-year plan. Did you know that Riverside was the first large school district to be voluntarily integrated? And did you know that there are still hundreds of kids being bused from the east side to other schools? And that there's no elementary school in the east side, which of course is a concern to the east side residents when their kids have to go at some distance to other schools. And when there was integration, kids from the east side and Casablanca were bused out. No white students were bused in. So that's important history that still continues to this day. Remember, at the time, there was also a burning of the school. Lowell School was burnt down, or at least severely damaged because of arson at that time and the concern. So there's lots of history in the city as well. Health disparities, certainly there's lots of information to be had about health disparities based on race. Infant mortality among Black infants is much higher than in other races, for example. And maternal health is a major concern. Lots and lots of issues around health disparities. Did you know that the city just approved a redistricting plan to change the wards in the city? And that has impact on many communities in the city. In the east side, for one, has some serious concerns about what has happened to the east side, being moved from one ward into the downtown ward, Ward 1, where they then have to compete for representation with the Wood Streets and with the downtown businesses. Did you know that since 1998, when the Taisha Miller killing occurred, some of you were around at that time, since then there have been no less than 5 formal reports making recommendations to change policing in the city. And you know how many of those actually made an impact, how many have been approved, etc. These are important issues for us here locally. So I'm not here to debate these issues or whatever, but just to try to get people thinking about the issues that are impacting us here locally, much less those certainly that are going on nationally. So we're going to, I'll invite up our speakers first, and then we'll, I would ask you to hold your questions and comments till we're done because of the issue of time. We'll then have a question and answer issue time period. And then I would like, if we can, to have a little discussion amongst us about what we as a church and what we as individuals need to do, and which was the theme of Reverend Heller this morning, about what does Jesus expect of us as Christians in dealing with the issues of divisiveness and hate? So I I will first invite, we had a book club here, a period of time, a year or 2.5 ago. Several members, some of you participated, for some or all. I've asked 2 people who were in that to speak briefly about kind of from an individual standpoint. What did they learn? What was their journey of learning? And then we'll talk about community issues as well. So first, Sandy Schnack, who all of you know, I'm sure, at least those in the church, very active member. And then Andrea Briggs, who is from All Saints Episcopal Church, will share her perspective in terms of being a part of the book club, but also many other activities she's involved in along these lines. So I will ask them to speak first.
Thank you, Donna. It is true that I participated in the book club, although I'm going to mention perhaps other personal memories. The book clubs, though, were very valuable in terms of learning a bit about the history of racism. And one of the things that struck me too about the books that we read was the history of expressions that we use, that I had used and heard as a child and had no idea the background. And I think we're just beginning to recognize so much that we learned and didn't know the background of. But I wanted to share just some things from my memory, actually. Probably the first strong memory that I have was when I was in high school. I saw my mother reading the newspaper and she had tears streaming down her face. And I asked what in the world was wrong. It was in 1963. She was crying because she was reading about the 4 girls that were killed in the bombing in Birmingham, Alabama, in the church, the 16th Avenue Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. So of course we had a discussion about why. And I think that maybe one of the most striking things I have realized in recent years is how unaware white people are, how oblivious to the pain that others have felt. To paraphrase Reverend Heller this morning, we didn't know what we didn't know. I didn't know what I didn't know. Just a few examples. We went to a class reunion about 10 years ago, and we went to one of the hangouts that we went to in high school, and the hamburger joints everybody loved, everybody went to, had a wonderful time after events. I happened to sit next to a Black man that I didn't know. And I said, "Isn't this great? It's fun, brings back such memories from high school." He said, "Well, no, not for me. Black people weren't allowed in this restaurant when we were in high school." I didn't know what I didn't know. How could we not have known those kinds of things when we were in high school? I also learned at that same class reunion that when our band went on tour, which we did every year, we went into a restaurant and got all settled down to have our lunch. And as soon as we got settled, the band director collected us all and we got back on the bus. And I didn't know then and didn't know until 10 years ago that the reason we left the restaurant was because the band director had been told that the Black students would not be served. I could not have known that. And how could I not have known it until 10 years ago? I think probably the most difficult for me, the most touching, was when my dear friend at work came in a number of years ago now, came into work and she was visibly upset. I said, what in the world is wrong? Well, she shared with me that her son, who was a gentle giant, the night before had gone to a class for his SAT test. He was driving home and he was followed by police. She heard a little ruckus, looked out the window. He was face down on the lawn with a gun in his back. Why? Then a couple of years after that, our son happened to be jaywalking at UCLA. He was stopped by a police officer, and he got a little sassy with the officer and said, okay, I understand. I should not have been jaywalking, but did you really need backup? When I heard that story, I thought, would that story have been different had he had darker skin? I think about white privilege, a term I hadn't heard, frankly, until fairly recently. White privilege, not having to experience suspicion because of one's race or color of skin. I think we white folks have to recognize and just think about that a whole lot more than we have.
Good morning. I'm Andrea Briggs. I am the Minister for Community Engagement at All Saints Episcopal Church. I've been attending that church for 20 years or so and been part of the Riverside community for a lot longer than that. I want to talk about how, I'm sorry that, Bill, I didn't get to hear your remarks, but we don't know what we don't know. And I want to talk about how we must start where we are. We must start where we are, but we don't need to stay there. I grew up in a household in the Midwest a long time ago, parented by loving parents who were not well educated about things of race. And I grew up with all of the standard stereotypes that white people have. That's not where I'm going to stay, but I don't need to feel guilty for that. I think the common response of white folks to feeling guilty is not particularly useful. Yeah, wrong, but not carrying around the load of guilt. So the journey for me has been a long, complicated one, sometimes paying attention to race and sometimes not. I was privileged to come in contact with an article by Peggy McIntosh about the invisible backpack. I don't know if you know the name Peggy McIntosh. She was very much ahead of her time among white folks. She published an article, she's a faculty member at one of the East Coast liberal arts colleges, I think, published an article in 1989 about it's basically centered about white privilege, but the backpack that white people carry around that enables them to walk into a jewelry store and not be followed, that enables them to be seated at a restaurant and served. And it was way ahead of its time, at least in my experience. And it was such an eye-opener for me that, and I read it in the 90s and have been able to build from there to further my own education. What might any of us do? Read as much as you can, listen to smart people talking, either podcast or live. The thing that's been most useful to me is to hang out with white people who are also concerned about racial inequities and practice the language so that I don't feel like I'm going to step on some toes or say something stupid, so that I can reveal my ignorance in a place where I'm not going to offend somebody. It's really important to find, and what I found is that it's really important to have a group of people around you who will accept and forgive you even for the things that you don't yet know, and help you go forward. One of the things that I've been picking up lately is this phrase, hierarchy of human value. What it means, if you haven't heard the phrase before, is that we don't consider all human beings of equal value, that some are more valuable than others. And that just hurts that it's true, but if you look around you, it's pretty obvious that it's true. And that's one of the places where I'm trying to put my attention now, is to notice when, just in any kind of communication or situation where the person who's not in a wheelchair has more value than the person who is. The person who is 30 has more value than the person who's 70. The person who's male has more value than the female, and so on and so on. And it's all around us. It's very present, and you'll see it easily. As Christians, what's the basis for doing this work? And I think you heard a lot of that this morning. I don't think Jesus ever spoke about race, but he certainly spoke about inclusiveness and compassion and reaching for the person who is currently on the outside edge of the circle. And that's where I am and what I want to be doing. I want to include the prayer that I heard at All Saints this morning, just an hour ago, the collect for the day, and I'll ask you to pray it with me. O God, from whom all good proceeds, grant that by your inspiration we may think those things that are right, and by your merciful guiding may do them. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Think the things that are right, and by God's inspiration do them. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd ask Sandy and Andrea just to share a little bit so we can really get a sense and think about what is our individual responsibility around the issues of racism, and what can we learn, and what is that journey, and how can we do that? And we have some resources and things we'll talk about after a bit. But at this point, I want to shift over to community activism. We have responsibilities individually, but we also have responsibilities, I believe, and I think what was shared this morning certainly supports that we as a church need to be active and aware. And you may or may not know, we did adopt an anti-racism statement 2 years ago, 2021, as a congregation. We have had an anti-racism plan that Mission Board has been working on, some partly in terms of music and forums and education and some advocacy that some of us are involved with. But we need to be talking about that more as a total group, which we will do a little later. But at this point, I want to introduce two speakers who will talk more about a couple of the organizations in the community. There are lots. We could only invite so many today because of time. But I wanted to have them share a little bit about the organization and about what they are working on and what they see as the issues that need to be addressed in Riverside. So I will first, I guess, ask Ken Gutierrez, who is a board member from the Civil Rights Institute. He was retired as a planning director, I understand, from the city of Riverside was in the city, I guess, 30 years or thereabouts. So we're very glad to have him here to share some about the Civil Rights Institute. And then we've invited Janice Ruth, who we're closely with, and from Anti-Racist Riverside. I want to acknowledge Sherry as well, who's done some wonderful work with our website and so forth. But she will share as well about that organization, and she's very active and is a very active leader in the city. The mayor calls upon her. She gets appointed to many groups and so forth. So she's well known, and I would like to thank both of them for coming. So you want to start off, Ken?
Thank you. It's great to be here. A couple things that aren't in, the bio. Yeah, I was the planning director. I even served a short time in the city council, by mistake. Yeah, but, that's not, who I am. My journey with racism and dealing with race began when I was born, probably before I was born. My parents were met at a multiracial, multicultural church in 1950. I mean, Martin Luther King said that the most segregated hour in America is, 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. That's not what I grew up with. I grew up with something that's just the opposite. I look at my parents' wedding picture, and there's two white people, and that's my mom and her sister. The rest were Black, Mexican, Korean, and Japanese in 1950. So we're all informed by our past, right? So that's just a little bit of what informed my past. Growing up in that church, moving to another church in La Fuente that was also multiracial and multicultural, and then coming out to First Christian Church in Riverside. And the first time we met with the minister, I said, "This is a very different congregation than I'm used to." And he says, "Oh, no, we're multiracial. We have one Black member." As if that means anything, right? So, so it was kind of a culture shock, for me. I served as the chair of the Anti-Racism Pro-Reconciliation. Let me try that again. Anti-Racism Pro-Reconciliation Committee for the Pacific Southwest region of the Disciples of Christ Church for several years. Went through a lot of anti-racism training. That does not qualify me to stand up here. What qualifies me to stand up here is because I'm on the board, as Donna mentioned, of the Civil Rights Institute. But I just want to give you a little bit of that background about who I am and where I came from, and I guess what informs my past. Have any of you been to the Civil Rights Institute? Excellent, wonderful. Just a quick note: if you haven't been, it's just down the street, behind the Fox Theater, across from the new downtown library. It's not just the Civil Rights Institute. It is technically called Mission Heritage Plaza. 72 units of affordable housing at various levels of affordability. Home for the Fair Housing Council of Riverside County, home for the Civil Rights Institute, and in the center is an area we call the Diversity Center. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that because it really is a big part of why the Civil Rights Institute exists. It was the vision of Rose Mays and Lala Acharya. It was years coming. That building cost some, I haven't seen the final numbers, but I'm going to guess it was something like $35 million. So tell me how 72 units at $35 million is affordable housing. These are one bedroom, maybe two bedroom apartments, right? Very basic. That's over $500,000 per apartment unit. And that's affordable housing. It took us 18 different funding sources to make that happen, and a lot of goodwill from the community, from the city of Riverside, from the state. So, Civil Rights Institute is what I'm here to talk about. Is there a need for a Civil Rights Institute in inland Southern California? Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all live here, right? We all read the news. We all, get out of our houses. But just look at some demographics. 69% of the population in this area identify as minority, as non-white. 51% Hispanic, 7% Black, 7% Asian, and 3% of two or more ethnicities. 2.8 million of our 4.6 million people are Latinx. That's the sixth highest in the nation. Over 42% speak a language other than English at home. just a quick side note, my father was a principal in the Baldwin Park School District, and when he was there, 38% of the parents only spoke Spanish at home. He was the only Spanish-speaking principal in the entire school district. We're younger and poorer than the US per capita rate. Our service area is devastated by ongoing social ills. Yeah, there certainly is a need for a civil rights institute. I'm going to take just a moment and read to you our mission statement. And this is the last time I'm going to read to you. The Civil Rights Institute of Inland Southern California inspires people of all ages through lifting up the historic and ongoing civil rights stories of the region, fostering community advocacy, and building champions of tomorrow. Our vision, connecting people from all walks of life through stories, sharing of information, and personal relationships to make Inland Southern California a center of civil rights and social justice. And our values, inclusive, collaborative, good trouble. That sounds familiar. Because that is what we want to do, is cause and create good trouble. So how do we do that? I mean, that's why we're here. How do we do that? Well, there's a number of ways. If you've been to the Civil Rights Institute, you'll notice the sidewalk on the outside. There's our Walk of Fame. Just like I shared with you my story, Riverside has a story. And these are our civil rights champions, the people, whose shoulders we now stand on. And we're honoring their contribution to civil rights in the area. We have exhibits. You've been to our exhibit space that's up now. If you haven't, please visit it. It'll be up through at least the end of fall. It's called Still I Rise, the Black IE Fight for Justice. And it's a tremendous exhibit. We've gotten lots of people coming and visiting and giving us accolades for doing it. I hope all of our exhibits are as professional and as profound and make us think as much as that one does. The exhibit space is a key part of what we are, but it's not all of what we are. We are looking for future exhibits. Like everything else, what's stopping us? Well, money. It's not ideas, it's not need. But we do have 2 exhibits that are coming up. One focuses on farm workers in the Coachella Valley. The other focuses on life in San Bernardino County. And then we are working on what's happening beyond that. Perhaps something to do with the early Chinatowns, not just in Riverside, but in the region. We are the Civil Rights Institute of Inland Southern California. So our focus has to be outside of just Riverside. Another key part of what we are is oral history. We want to be an oral history center. We have a digital archive. If you've been to the inside our building, you'll notice that there is a room set aside for recording those oral histories. If you ever listen to StoryCorps on NPR, it's that kind of a thing where we will invite people in to tell their stories. Kind of like I told you my story, we all have those stories. And it's important that we share those stories and that we archive them. We're already talking to some of the universities and other institutions in the area about being the center place. So we can be the repository, for those stories. So it's aspirational, but we have the equipment. We're hoping to get that set up in the near future, because telling stories is what gets us to grow and move forward in a positive direction. We also want to be a place for advocacy. Not just responding to those terrible things that happen, but getting out in front of them and being a prophetic voice for the community. We need to address community needs, before those tragedies actually happen. We want to be that center for social justice. And that leads me to the final component of Civil Rights Institute, and that's our Diversity Center. If you've been there, you notice that we have a 140-seat room that has streaming capabilities and, complete AV equipment set up. That's supposed to be that place for the community together. It's going to do a couple of things. One is if you've ever been a part of a nonprofit board in Riverside or a community group, it's tough to find a place to meet, right? And our goal is to be a place where community groups can come in and meet at low to no cost. I mean, it's the Bank of America Diversity Center. Anybody here from Bank of America? It's the Bank of America Diversity Center. Great thanks goes to Bank of America for funding that. Our next step is to get Bank of America to endow that area so we can now have a full-time person that is there to allow you to come in and use that space free of charge. Right now, we have to charge a little bit because we have people that have to come in and run the AV equipment and monitor it. But if we can, get somebody, to endow that, now we can make it free and available to everybody. We want this to be kind of the water cooler of Riverside, the place where discussions happen, where debates happen, a place for discourse. One of the things we've lost in this country is that ability to talk to each other about sensitive issues, right? And we want to be that place where we can come in and get people to share ideas, even unpopular ideas, and talk about that. We had a group come in to talk about reparations not too long ago, and they had been hearing some noises. So we called the police department and said, you know what, I wouldn't want your presence right now, but just be aware that we've been hearing some things and, some social media chatter. Some groups from Temecula have been talking about coming down, into Riverside. Just do a favor and drive by once in a while. We shouldn't have to do that, but we do. But we want to be that place where a safe place where those dialogues and discussions can happen. One of our, I mentioned our values, and collaboration and inclusion is a key part of that. We can't do this alone. We need partners, and we have a ton of partners, like Anti-Racist Riverside and many, many others. Our diversity center is used regularly by a dozen groups right now. Different colors, different flavors, different focuses and topics, but it's being used by the community. And I'd be happy to go into any of that later, but I'm running out of time. But I just wanted to give you that snapshot of what the Civil Rights Institute is about, and encourage you to come down and visit. If you have time, volunteer. We're open now. Our exhibit area is open. Actually, this week, it's going to start being open Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, all afternoon. So from 12 to 5, we've added Wednesdays. So, and our goal is to be open 5 days a week, including weekends. And the only way that happens is we get volunteers to come in and staff the area. So if you have some time and want to help, see me. We've got a place for you. Thank you.
Let me just interject that Fellowship and Mission Board are working together to do a visit to the Civil Rights Institute.
July 22nd.
July 22nd. So certainly plan to come, even if you've been before. It's well worth the effort. It's a wonderful, wonderful exhibit. Janice, turn. You got
Thank you, Donna. Oh, no. Wow. I'm humbled and honored, especially trying to follow Sandy and Andrea and Ken. But I know that you all have your own experiences, and those are as valuable as anyone who spoke, and mine, of course. And as a co-founder of Anti-Racist Riverside, what drove me to that is much like Bill Heller's story. I had actually, before COVID and before the murder of George Floyd, had found something that came about while Ron Leverage was mayor. And it was, he started the Mayor's Multicultural Forum, and they had this great kind of code that they said, people should sign on to, businesses and the like, right, about how we should operate in the city of Riverside. And I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head now. And since then, we have an anti-racist statement as well. But I thought, why is this just sitting here? Why is it just sitting here? It's been here almost 20 years and no one's ever tried to make this happen. So I started first by giving the city a proposal that, I will help you make this happen, to which I got almost no response. I mean, they did give me a meeting, so, and probably mostly because I knew the city manager. So I said, okay, well, what next? So I went before city council, I think November, and I said, look, you have this great plan, you have this great statement, right? Let us make this into a plan, operationalize it, and put it forward, because this is very important. Why wait until something happens and then you have to respond and it looks like you're scrambling to respond? Why don't we just do something now in my 3 minutes? So, nothing came from that. And then, and I send emails to council, the mayor, anybody, and I tell them what I think, and it doesn't matter if they care or if they agree, I still send it. And then in December, I went back again and said the same thing. In January, there was an incident that came out of King High School where students were in a picture on social media with swastikas and all kinds of things, right? So I went back in January and I said, we should do something about this statement, make it a plan, let's make this happen. Okay, nothing. February, there are students in the middle of the junior high school, I don't know, a group of students shouting the M-word, right? So I go back, I say, look, this is the second incident now. I've been talking about this since November. We really should do something about this. And of course, there's no response. And it helped me though, I learned a lot. One, don't go before council unless you've already made a demand, okay? A written demand. So this is just sort of on the ground, how you want to change things. And then you go before council and then you bring a bunch of other people with you. And say, we have put before you this request. We would like to see it on agenda. When you put it on agenda, we'll be back, but we'll be talking to you in the interim. But anyway, so then COVID hit, right? And then George Floyd gets murdered. And I had kind of the desire to try to do something before, hadn't thought about what that was a catalyst for me as well, as like Bill said. But then, because, and there were people working to get the county to declare racism a public health crisis. Mm-hmm. And so that the city council decides to declare racism a public health crisis. She did a pretty good job because effectively they took what the county did and they put it in. Same declaration, right? And so at that point I thought, nothing's going to happen unless we do something, unless there's some kind of watchdog effort. And so I spoke at the council meeting where they were going to approve this resolution. And afterwards, a friend of mine called me, Leah Stewart, and said, let's do something. I said, I'm going to do something, but let's do it together. Let's call Regina Patton-Stell, who is president of NAACP, and see what we can come up with. I said, I'm doing something anyway, okay? And so we did, and we talked about it. And the first thing we did was to come up with a name, I guess. I don't even know if we came up with the name originally, but eventually we became Anti-Racist Riverside because we wanted to be very clear what we were working on, right? We decided that all of us could know a lot more, right? I'll never know enough. I've lived a life where I've seen a lot, I've experienced a lot, but it doesn't come close to me understanding, Sandy's experience, Andrea's, Donna's, Ken's, and other people I know in the room. So we all can learn a lot more. I was listening to Bill well, let me say this. I came up with something. I need to fill myself with knowledge that leads to understanding that informs my actions. So I'll never know enough. That is my stance. That is my permanent stance. It's not impossible for me to know enough. I didn't, but what I do know tells me the following. That capitalism is the basis for the country we live in. Racism is a puppet of capitalism. It is used as a means by which to ensure that profits stay as large as possible. And because it has been honed so well and learned to evolve so well over time, it is able to take advantage of that at any given time with any given group of people, whether it's race, age, ability, culture, color, your gender, anything you could possibly name. If you use the principles of racism, you can find many ways to persecute people, to keep them down, to keep them where you want them, so that they can't look up to see, oh, it's you doing this, okay? And one of the great ways to do that is to ensure that people are always fighting against each other. Because if I'm looking at you and you and you and you, and we're fighting each other over things that mean something to us, but in that big picture, if we could just eliminate the cause, right, then we don't have a reason to fight. So Anti-Racist Riverside came about because it exists everywhere. There's a book called The Sum of Us, and I think your book club might have read it.
Yeah.
And it is one of the things that I take to heart, and that is racism hurts us all. And it keeps coming up more and more. So I was in a meeting, I don't know if you were on Friday's meeting, Ken. So, okay. So we have been talking about warehouses and, yes. So, and when I asked him that, we're talking about the Red Cross groups. We were talking about warehouses and their impact on the region, right? And we could focus on the fact that many of these places surround communities of color, because historically. But what you really ought to understand is racism doesn't care about race, it cares about money. You cannot prevent the air from going across the entire city, across the entire region. The fact that we all are impacted by the worst air in the country has nothing to do with race and everything to do with money. So we're entitled to a class action suit of every person who lives and works here because of that somehow, right? I mean, if we could pinpoint who it was, right? It's again going back to what Heather McGee talks about. It hurts us all. Every one of the systems hurts us all. Now, the hierarchy of human value is the way we get divided and the way we get, to fight each other. And it continuously tries to ensure that white is at the top and black is at the bottom. And it doesn't matter who comes into the country or out during all kinds of people who had to become white after many years of being here, like Italians or Jews. So those bookends of black and white are the way the system is kept intact, okay? It's not glue in between of the things that we think matter between us or wrong between us or inequity between us. It's those two things that are more like a vice that squeeze this all together and keep it the way it is, okay? And again, it evolves over time, right? So luckily, there are lots of things and lots of ways you could get involved. But I always encourage people to go with your passion, okay? To go with your passion. Because that focus, that singular focus on the thing that you really care about, is a place where you and people like you can make the most difference. Like Anti-Racist Riverside, it kind of drives some people crazy and other people kind of don't care, but I call it, an organization of the willing and available. And sometimes there's 4 of us meeting, and sometimes if we're working on something, there's 20, 30 people. It just depends, because people come in with their passion, they come in with their time. There are mainstays. Like if Donna is just like a blessing. She's my Siamese twin. It's like I could not see us without her. But if she needed to do something else, or when she goes out of the country, right, then other people should be there. There should always be people there to do the work and keep it going, right? And we don't have a membership. We call ourselves members, but we don't have a membership. There's no dues. There's just, if you want to be in the room and decisions are being made, please feel free to give your input and help make the decision. Because if you care the way we care, then we believe you'll be trying to do the right thing. And that's what's important. So what do? We do all kinds of things. We have a meeting twice a month on the 2nd and 4th Wednesdays. And then on 2nd and 4th Saturdays, we try to either have, and hopefully we'll get back to our candid conversations where we used to do book club things. But we also have speakers, and we have a process that is called the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation process. I'm not even sure who found it. I don't know if it was you, Donna, or someone else, but it is a process that the Kellogg Foundation kind of supported, helped put together, and that we think in the way we're trying to get it going here in Riverside is an open and easy way for people to have the conversations that we're having here, right? And we haven't even conversed yet. We've simply been listening to each other, right? But we haven't been afraid to say the word race, color, love, hate. And so Bill said, fear is where our lives come up short. And I could not agree more. And I really, once you said that, it really resonated with me, because I think one of the things about why we do the work we do with Anti-Racist Riverside is because no one should fear having this conversation. No one should fear having this conversation. And in all honesty, I tell you that Black people have this conversation. Black people, Latino people may, Asian people may, but how many white people have this conversation with each other? And it's because I think that there's a fear about talking about that. Unless you're in an affinity environment like Andrea talked about, where you can't talk about it, right? But racism caused that fear. Just like the terrorism of racism caused fear in us. The fear that my mother had to tell me, don't go off in the wilderness in the dark, not because I might get molested, but because I might get hung, right? And I have to pass similar things down to my children. And that's really the basis of why racism is a public health crisis, is because I'm passing down the anxiety and the fear and the worry to my children that has been passed down through generations to me, okay? Not because, and yes, because of the disproportionate numbers of people who have high blood pressure and other things, right? Diabetes, sure, that's all public health as well. But all of that, and the basis of all of that, is racism. And the basis of racism is capitalism. Do not forget that, okay? So that means we're all impacted. I hope we can eliminate fears, anti-racist Riverside. There are a few things we're working on. The TRHT process is just 5 questions. If you happen to stop at the Juneteenth Festival next Saturday, we'll have one board up for each question, and you can come up and read and put down your answers to that. But that's the way that it works. You could get together in a little group, you could get together in a big group, and you could just go through the questions. And the final question is, what do we do about it? Now that we understand where we'd like to be, now that we understand who should be involved, so now what do we do about that, okay? And our hope over the, whatever time it takes, because you have to be patient for something that lasted 400 years, and that is to see, 80 or 100,000 people in the city of Riverside who have gone through the TRHT process, the Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation process. Because it frees people to have the discussion. And everybody should be free. With that, there are some subject areas that we have particular interest in. There's definitely a group, and Donna's part of that, that is around health equity. And the county is making a dashboard about health equity and trying to look at all of Riverside County at least about that. And there are a variety of things that are going on with that, monthly meetings. So if you have any interest. A lot of times people go to city council meetings and they complain about school districts and they're in the wrong place. They're in a different room, okay? Because the city doesn't have any control in particular over the school districts. And we have 2 and a little bit of 1, but primarily Albert and RUSD is the largest, right? But we also try to take on those issues because lots of things have happened and they use things like critical race theory often to just try to be some kind of a match, right? To light a flame when really has nothing to do with education in the way that we're doing education in these times. But there are national efforts that have targeted Riverside, and you have to be aware of that as well. So, poke around on the internet, learn as much as you can if you're interested in school districts, if you came out of one and you'd like to do some work in that. So we have different people. We have at least 2 members who are on each board of Albert and Riverside Unified. So definitely let us know or come to a meeting or talk to someone that's in anti-racist Riverside. Housing. So housing, if you haven't already, please read a book called The Color of Law, if you really want to understand housing. And on top of that, and this is just my personal opinion, I think the federal government owes us a lot, and we will take it in cash to help us out of our housing crisis, because they're the ones who got us into it. We have a city where portions of it, different portions of it, have huge lots, and other people are squeezed in. And then we have a state who is really not understanding of what happens, so maybe I should start sending them the book. That you must plan your housing along corridors with transportation. Well, of course, transportation has been planned along corridors where most of the people are. So you're telling me to compact already crowded areas by adding more houses. That doesn't make sense, right? Where we have other areas that, why is a piece of land a fire hazard? Because nothing's built on it. Right. So housing is kind of 3 parts. There's the affordable housing part, right? And that affordable part is, again, I submit, the government's fault, because they pushed this whole segregate the United States, and it has impacted us severely, okay? The second thing is sufficiency, right? Again, same thing I just talked about. We don't have enough. And so I still think that this is a federal government issue, because they pushed us into planning in the ways that segregated us. And so now it's left us in a condition where we don't have enough housing, where the housing costs too much. And there are ways out of it, but unless we focus on those instead of just following the footsteps of what the state says, we can't get out. And then another housing issue is crime-free housing. So from my personal perspective, as well as from a Christian a set of sensibilities, for us, criminals just need to be punished, right? Other countries who are much more successful and have far, far less recidivism look at it differently, right? They look at it from you did something wrong. Let's figure out how we reintegrate you back with your family and your community. And we don't look at it that way. And it's a little bit tough for us too, because we have so many things that other countries don't, right? Like guns that we can have anytime and as many as we want. Or just, the way in which we treat education, which is systemic, right? You must test. You don't test well, then you get, kicked back, or you don't get to go forward, or everything is a kind of a punishment in the way we look at systems and how we treat people here, right? So we need some thought around how we want to redo that. And the only place you can actually do that is at this community level. You have to do it at the smallest piece, right? Neighborhoods, blocks. And as we come together with the same kind of thoughts, then we make cities make changes, right? And then we put it out from there. So the crime-free housing is about keeping criminals out of homes, right? But not just criminals, right? Because you don't know if your child is going to go out and steal something from the store, but you happen to be receiving services from the city or the county, and you have this housing that the county helps you pay for somehow. And if your child goes to the store and gets arrested, then your family gets kicked out of the housing. My parents knew probably about, when I was a teenager, my parents knew maybe about 20% of what I did on every day. And that was only because I was in the house, okay? I don't know about everybody else here, okay? But even if you lived on a farm, I am sure you went off into areas that your parents had no idea where you were or what you were doing, because we're adventurous, because we want to learn things and know people and figure out our world, and figure out, well, if I take this, will he know it? Sometimes it is that simple. Sometimes it's not. Many times it's not, when you are into criminality for a reason, but that's just a whole other thing to consider. Crime-free housing is, can we get all of the landlords in the city to say, we will not house, anyone who's got a record, or, I don't know, I think that therein lies a great degree of injustice. And then I'm sure there are like 100 other things I could talk about, but my last one is when I get the time, and I'm going to plan this when, I am going to work on ending slavery. The 13th Amendment did not end slavery for everyone, and even allowed us to re-enslave people who were previously enslaved, right? All kinds of laws that said you could pick somebody up because they walked by a white person and they should have crossed the street, a million other reasons, right? And where we live, is where we should kind of maybe focus our efforts initially, right? Because all of these things have something going on here. We have a county jail. And it used to be that county jail was just, you kept people over until they went to court, and then, whatever happened, and then they got sent off to wherever they were going. But now we don't, because the state's kicking people out, right, of state prisons, because they're overcrowded and they have a million problems. So they end up coming back to the county jail. And that means right where we have this hall of justice and, you know, the Main Street Mall where we have all of the monuments to freedom and diversity. We also have slavery in our midst. And it's not right. And regardless of what they did, they should still have basic rights of citizens. There are other countries where people who are imprisoned vote. Why shouldn't they? Right? And all kinds of other things that we should think of here locally, that it doesn't matter if the state wants, or even if the county wants, you sit in this boundary and this is what we want. And if that's something that is your passion or something you might care about, then definitely come together around that and help make change. I was on the Human Relations Commission until I realized I had no power and could make no change. And, but the first thing I put on the agenda was the 13th Amendment. We have a county jail sitting here. We have slavery like around the corner. Does anybody care about that? And in our everyday lives, I get it. I don't think about this every day. I have work, and work takes up like 12 hours or something. But I do care about this in my heart. This is a passion. And so I know I will get to it. So what I ask you is think about what might be a passion in your heart and plan some time to get to it. And if you're not exactly sure how, please let anti-racism recite. And we'll be at the Juneteenth Festival if you'd like to drop by. So thank you very much.
Right, so hopefully that whet your appetite on a lot of different topics. Didn't provide all the answers, but certainly are many of the things, and there are many more, certainly, that we could talk about. So at this point, what I'd like to do, we've got, I appreciate your staying. I know we're going to run a little bit longer than we usually do here because of what we have going on. But I would like to ask Adam Winnicking, who helped start the White Faith Leaders Against Racism, if you have any comments you want to make at this point.
Not a whole lot. It has been said. My name is Adam. I'm the chair of the Social Environment Justice Committee, church across the street here, but also board secretary there. And yeah, help start the White Faith Leaders Against Racism group that meets every other Monday on Zoom. If you'd like some information, you're here at the church, please talk to Donna, or you can email me, socialjustice@uuchurch.org. I think what we've heard multiple times that's really important is just that racism is really easy to see as a problem for people of color, but it's something that affects all of us. And it's especially a problem for those of us who, with, white skin like myself, who can very easily ignore it and put it out of our minds and kind of go about our daily life without thinking about it. That's what allows it to continue. That's what allows it to continue to be a problem in our society. And until we really look at, our own personal biases and our own things we've learned growing up and address that, we're not really going to affect that kind of change. So I think that's really important. And it was mentioned the book, The Sum of Us, is very, very important if you want to know how does racism affect me. If I'm a white person living in the suburbs, how is racism really affecting me? When you look at things like state-funded college and public pools and all sorts of things that we're missing out on because of the effects of racism. So, yeah, thanks for doing this. It was really important.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to try to monitor time here because we want to get out of here at least by 1. Are there questions? Now Janice will be back. She had to step out a minute, but are there questions that people have of any of the speakers today? Reverend Heller?
That's the thing I feel like the talk that I gave today set the stage here, Janice. I hope it all feel. In essence, it's there. One of the items that Janice referred to is spoken of here in this book, white fragility. Why it's so hard for white people to talk about race. This is an invitation to look at this and to be able to see this in a manner that you can be looking at whatever beliefs we've been carrying around or what we've been avoiding looking at, that you may just be able to find here. This is by Robin DiAngelo. Robin DiAngelo, by the way, is a white woman.
No, I'm not.
Who's written this. So, white fragility. Why it's so hard? I
Thank you, Bill.
I want to reiterate that there are lots and lots of books. We're mentioning a few. We've got a few here. Many of us have ours digitally, so it isn't something we can bring and put on the table for you. Please again go to Anti-Racist Riverside. And there are other places you can go as well, but there we have a list of books that you can read. There are new books coming out all the time, so certainly don't limit yourself to just those. We've talked a lot about The Sum of Us by Heather McGee, and there's a copy over there as well if you would like to look at, because it gives you a really good summary. Janice mentioned The Color of Law, which has to do with how the government has participated in furthering racism over our history. So there's lots of things to learn. And again, our point here being, we have an individual responsibility, we believe, if we're going to have Christ-like love that Bill was talking about, in terms of becoming aware and not being silent, which means, in essence, that we're complicit if we do nothing, if we see things and do nothing. Are there questions of the speakers at this point?
Yes, I don't necessarily have a specific question. I'd just like to say that, first of all, I really appreciate what has been shared up to this point. I think it's very important. It's a very important conversation that we continue to have. But I want to share something with you. I don't know how many of you have really heard Kareem Abdul-Jabbar definition of racism, and I'm going to read that to you. Racism in America is like dust in the air. It seems invisible, even if you're choking on it. Until you let the sun in, then you'll see it everywhere. As long as we keep shining that light, we have a chance of cleaning it wherever it may land. But we have to stay vigilant because it's always still in the air. One of the things that I am doing is working on a concept of one people, one community, one world. And this is taking place along with the collaboration with the Latino Network, as well as the Riverside African American Historical Society, and other organizations will be brought onto it. But eventually what will happen is that we will be demonstrating what inclusivity looks like from the standpoint that we are working on a collaborative community event that would actually emphasize this concept. And this is going to take place in October at the Bank of America Diversity Center. But just kind of stay tuned. But if you have any questions at all, or you want to know how you become more involved, I think there's so many good things going on. I'd be more than happy to have you to champion this concept, this goal, this ability with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Keith?
This is just a comment to Janice. If you would please include your fight against slavery bail bonds. I think that is, and it's not an issue whether there should be or whether there shouldn't be, but what are bail bonds anyways? You know, two people can be in jail for the same thing. If you are economically depressed, you do not get out. If you are economically able, then you do get out. So what does that achieve? I think that's a form of slavery. And
So it is, one more way. Yeah.
The whole area of criminal justice, there are so many aspects of that that's really overlap with the issues of race and how different groups are treated and what happens, whether it be housing, whether it be the ability to vote. Many people who are felons can't vote in most states, and we have a disproportionate number of racial minorities, no longer minority, but in jail. So therefore, by nature of that, there are a disproportionate number of minorities that are marginalized, even in terms of voting. But there's just so many aspects to that area we could talk about. Other comments or questions? All right. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My idea
Hold it
of
up.
discrimination is for everyone. I am Mexican, and I feel sometimes I'm a professional CPA account, but still people think I'm not good enough. But to me, it's a missing point that I am a child of God, like you, all of you. To me, my perception is to start with the kids, teaching them love, no separation. I love babies that I come and touch them and they smile to me. They don't know my gender, they don't know me, but they smile at me. That innocence that we lose, all of us, when we grow up. So my suggestion is to teach children to love everyone, no matter what color, where coming from. This is my idea when I touch a kid, to teach him love. And as an adult, I don't have grandchildren, but the ones you have, you may have opportunity to tell them, to teach them love instead of fear. Fear separates us totally. Even in my country, people are racist. For people, they are less money or different features. And I always tell my family, why? You think this person is less than you because doesn't have money, doesn't have enough school. This is not to me. Each of us, we have a value. We are creation of God. What else? To me, that's the most important thing. To believe that I am like you, children of God. God to me is duplicate himself in each of you, in each of us. So while we think somebody is less than me, no, I can't. I am complete. Thank you for listening.
Okay, are there other comments? Okay, I'll bring them.
I think you can hear me.
Okay.
I was talking with Dick and asking him if he remembered. For those of us who were in college in the 1950s, there was a musical. And one of the phrases from one of the songs talked about hate and talked about racism. And the words were, you had to be carefully taught.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you.
I didn't know if you wanted on the mic so people at home can hear.
Yes.
People were talking about how they first got started, right, or your story or whatever. Mine was in 2015. I had retired from 40 years of teaching special needs students in 2013. And in 2015, it was the 50th anniversary of the march from Selma to Birmingham, Selma to Montgomery, across the Pettus Bridge. And I now had time because I was retired. So I put together a trip. I called it my civil rights trip. And I spent 2 months going through the South and visiting every civil rights museum that I researched that I could find. I have to tell you, that really changed me. I did not realize that I had white privilege. I mean, I didn't realize the significance, the extent to which I grew up. My father was in the Air Force, so we traveled and lived in bases all around the world. I grew up in my classrooms with children. It was like the United Nations because military servicemen marry, in the country where they are. And so I was exposed to many cultures, many languages. And anyway, so that was a big piece for me. So I encourage any of you, I'm trying to remember exactly what you said. First the knowledge, then the understanding, then the action. And that's what it was for me. So I visited all the civil rights museums, Birmingham, Selma, Montgomery, Atlanta, Memphis, and little towns as well, all around, and really opened my eyes. So I had the knowledge and started to get the understanding, like I said, in terms of, because I didn't think like, do I have a, and I was like, yes, you do have a role in this. And then was the action. And then through that, through joining Anti-Racist Riverside and White People of Faith Against Racism and social justice committees and things like that. So my suggestion, it was an easy thing. It was just going to these museums. It's not, just go to the civil rights museum, look at things. For me, that was an easy way to step into that. So I just encourage that for you as well.
Thank you, Ethan. So we only have just a few minutes. I wanted to, and this is a conversation obviously we could and should continue. But what I'd like to do is to ask those of us in the congregation here to talk a little bit or share a little bit or make suggestions about how you would like us as a church to move forward with the issues of addressing racism in the community. We've had forums, as you know, a variety of forums to try to help educate, really encourage, and you've heard many people encouraging us to learn. Our individual responsibility is to learn and be aware and stand up and speak out. But are there things you would like as part of the mission board, and there are others who are here, we'd like you to share any ideas you have now, or certainly if you want to talk to me or mission board later, do that as well. But we want to really look at what is the church's responsibility as a group and as a community, especially in the city of Riverside, as certainly Janice was reiterating. Any ideas, thoughts you have, comments? Donna?
I'm just thinking that as a church now, we have unity, fellowship, sharing, or sanctuary. I have to be honest, I'm kind of tired of talking to other white people who have the same ideas I have and who have read the same books. So I would like to do some things with our new Black family and have them share to us, how their real feelings. I'm just getting any value out of talking, quite honest, because all of us are in the same page. Anyway, that would be my suggestion. If we could start small by maybe having some group sessions with our new church family.
I did invite today, Reverend Benita, she's in the back, so we can continue this conversation. I do want to say, I agree with you, we need to learn, but one of the first things I learned in my reading is, as white people of privilege, it's our responsibility to teach ourselves and to learn. It isn't the responsibility of Black people or people of color to teach us. Okay, so I'm not opposing what you're saying, because I agree with you. There is a point at which we need to have cross-racial dialogue, but it doesn't change our individual responsibilities to really learn. So that was one of the first things that I forgot. No, I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, as much as reiterating that we need both. Yeah.
So what I think Barbara just kind of whispers in the ear is, what's next after you learn? Like I feel like Donna Wing has said, you know, we've read, we're trying to understand. So then what? I mean, what do we do? I guess join the anti-racist Riverside, or what do we do?
Again, that was what we were trying to accomplish some today, is to spur you on to think about what is, as Anna said, what's your passion? What areas are you interested in? There are lots of areas, some of which we've talked about today and some of which you haven't. You know, learn about what's going on in the city related to housing, if housing is your thing. Then, and we can certainly have focus groups or discussion groups here and come up with an action plan for how we as a church want to proceed, or how as we as individuals want to proceed. Because again, action is really what it's about, but it's based on the knowledge that we learn about the particular topics that we're most interested in. So that's what I'm trying to get a sense of here as well. So as mission board, we can certainly try to organize some things, some discussion groups, some planning groups. There's a lot of books out there now on the church's role in anti-racist kind of activities. We can learn from what other churches have done. That would be a part of our efforts. We could have an anti-racism planning group to really talk about, so what are we going to concretely do as a church? So I don't have all the answers for you, as much as we want a process by which we all talk about. I'm involved in a lot of things, and I know you are and others are as well. But right now we're talking about what do we want to try to do, and as a progressive church and a church that believes in love and equity and diversity, what do we want to do and how do we want to be involved in the community? So we need a process other than just mission board or my standing up here and talking, or Dennis or anybody else, right? We need everybody involved in, so what do we do? What do we care about? What do we want to take on? So I'm kind of answering and kind of not. That
The things we need to do is focus on what techniques can make a change in our community. And one of the things that I think of about that is that leadership matters. And that it's important for the church to influence the leadership of the community. It's one thing for us to improve our own understanding of issues. It's another thing to ask, how do you get the leadership of the community to adopt racially innocent strategies?
one of the things that we're concerned about that day with the white faith leaders is, think of the power that would come from all the churches or a large number of the churches coming together to push. You know, we have individuals who push individually and bring along some folks. But, you know, politics as it is, we need numbers. We need them to know that these are things that we need to that we're concerned about. We expect to see some changes. And there are a list of things. We don't have time to go into all of those today, but there are some things that have been recommended over and over and over again that haven't happened. And so that may be a place to start. So now we're getting some, getting some comments.
Yes.
I see.
The structure already exists. It's called PICO. Pacific Organization, no, can you tell me exactly?
I know PICO, I don't know what it all stands for.
Yeah, Barbara knows, because she was on their board.
ICUC.
And their premise is you win if you're Roberts and they had $10 million, $100 million, or if you show up with 1,000 people at the meeting. Those are the two different ways of winning. Anyway, that structure's there. We can be part of that. I think we fell out of the loop.
Yeah.
That's the UC. And Adam was, and he was the person that I was with ICUC. And
That's a branch of people.
correct, yes, correct.
We've been very much involved with this, but it has not had a lot to do in Riverside in recent years. And maybe we can make it happen again. Right.
Okay. Other thoughts, comments about what you would personally like to see our church do? The Healing Conversations book that was mentioned several times, that is a process, because much of what is talked about is change happens often on a one-to-one basis as well. The more we understand and can show love and acceptance and that healing process that it talks about, we could have a conversation so we can go out and speak with other people on a one-to-one basis and make some change. It isn't all about just the big change and the big political movements, although those are important, but on a one-to-one basis. So we could certainly have conversations and come together, and I'm sure, Reverend Benita, you are willing to have further conversation with us about maybe things we could do collectively as well. Okay, any other comments? I know we're short on time. This is not the end. This is basically a way to sort of get us thinking more and more detail. Please talk to me, talk with each other, and we will have some follow-up and some more discussion and decisions made about what kind of concrete action we'll take next.
Thank you, Donna.
So
for
thank
doing
you,
this.
thank you all. On a Sunday, help us.